Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The show is about to begin.
Welcome to the podcast, concerts that made us, interviews and stories, tales from the bus. We love taking you back to when it all went down. The greatest live shows and that cheering crowd sound. It's concerts that made us, concertsthatmadeus.com.
On this episode of Concerts That Made Us, I'm chatting with Jim Hustwit. Jim is a musician and composer for TV and film. He has worked with such brands as the BBC, Universal and Apple. He also has his own company called Larp Music. Now before we get chatting to Jim, we're going to take a listen to one of his compositions. It's Legends Don't Die featuring K Sparks, courtesy of Audio Socket ASX. So, without further ado, let's get on with the show.
Time moving faster than a BM. Gray sky swarming, I see them. Swerving and cursive, elusive, it's rather intrusive. We just keep winning now. We just keep winning now. We just win, grind don't stop, keep on feeding this hunger. Killing everything, yeah, I feel like a monster. Homie is dead, I just bought me a shovel. Bury him daily, the new we just hustle. Flow is magnificent, we are significant. What's the predicament? We just so militant. Spread my wings, we gon' fly. Living legends don't die. Let's go, let's go. Spread my wings, we gon' fly. Living legends don't die. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Just win. Spread my wings, we gon' fly. Living legends don't die. Let's go, let's go, let's go. We don't stop, we keep pushing. Flow is magnificent, we are significant. We don't stop, we keep winning. What's the predicament? We just so militant. Seeming though it's problematic. Addicted to winning, I feel like an addict. It's just reality, ain't no one bad as me. Feel the capacity. Grind don't stop, keep on feeding this hunger. Killing everything, yeah, I feel like a monster. Homie is dead, I just bought me a shovel. Bury him daily, the new we just hustle. Push it, push it, push it. Flow is magnificent, we are significant. Push it, push it, push it. What's the predicament? We just so militant. Push, push. Back to the basics, hard to face this. Killing everything, yeah, we leaving no traces. Evidence, they just be negligence, I mean nemesis. Rule like the predators, we grind this everything. We find this evidence, we just be striving. Always surviving, we just be riding. Always colliding. Spread my wings, we gon' fly. Living legends don't die. Spread my wings, we gon' fly. Living legends don't die. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go.
Jim, you're very welcome to Concerts That Made Us.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. It's great to have you. Now, I'm dying to find out your musical history and how you got to the point where you are. You're a composer, producer. You run
Yes.
Larp Music. and
Yes.
you make compositions for the likes of the BBC, Universal, but there's one piece of information that sticks out at me, and I can't believe you haven't had this wiped from the internet. You were responsible for getting Crazy Frog to number 1.
I can't claim 100% responsibility for that, but I was certainly part of the team that, I sometimes joke because this was in a previous life when I was doing the Crazy Frog. That was when I was a marketing consultant basically, and so it was latterly that I sort of shifted into music, and I kind of joke now that everything I'm doing musically in the world is to sort of like make reparations for crimes against music by helping the Crazy Frog get to number 1. But that said, I also joke that the Crazy Frog prevented Coldplay from getting to number 1, and in many people's eyes, that's heroic and well received. So it depends which way you look at it.
Yeah, that's a bit of a saving grace, all right. But I'm sure we'll touch on how you managed to get such a, I don't know what you could say, such a song to number 1 later. But we'll move on to your personal history. Can you remember your very first musical memory?
Yeah, it was funny you should ask that, because just the other week, for something that I'm doing, I had to delve into an old LP called All Aboard Children's Songs, and it's like a compilation album of loads of different songs, and there's one called The Laughing Policeman. There's Ernie, Who Drove the Fastest Milk Cart in the West, which was a song by Benny Hill.
Oh.
And it was this compilation album, and there was a song called Bum Titty Bum, which was Sophia Loren and Peter Sellers. All these kind of random songs, but those are my first musical memories of putting that LP on and listening to that. But weirdly, when you go back as well, like the Benny Hill track, Ernie, Who Drove the Fastest Milk Cart in the West, the lyrics in that song are all about the reason he drove a fast milk cart was because he was having an affair with every woman in the neighborhood, so he had to drive away really quickly. So as a kid listening to that, you know, today you might go, well, that's a little bit inappropriate for a kid's song, but I didn't read between the lines. It was just a cool, quirky song about a guy who drove a fast milk cart. So.
Yeah. It's definitely one of the most interesting answers I've heard so far anyway. But was there a point then when you were a child that kind of opened your eyes to music, made you want to maybe pursue music as a career?
Well, I think the career thing came very late on, but I think there was one seminal moment for me was at school in assembly. A girl got up in assembly and played Wombles of Wimbledon on the clarinet. So for anyone who wasn't born, I mean, I was born in 79, but even the Wombles predated me. But it's basically a sort of animated cartoon about these little creatures that live on Wimbledon Common in London and go around picking up litter and sort of building their homes from it. So early recycling message, but and seeing her do that on stage or in assembly, it blew my mind. She recreated this theme tune that I knew from television. She'd recreated it on this instrument, and I was just like, whoa, what just happened? And I went home that night and I said to my mum, I said, I want to play the clarinet. I want to play the Wombles of Wimbledon on the clarinet. And I think that was probably the seminal moment that kind of got me interested in music. And weirdly as well, I think looking back, the reason I started electric guitar was because I wanted to be able to emulate Guns N' Roses. I was hugely into sort of like rock, and like it was Guns N' Roses and Def Leppard, and I wanted to be able to play Paradise City. And so that was kind of what prompted me to get an electric guitar. So there's these sort of things that fall into place. And I think with me, for some reason, it was emulation. It wasn't so much emulation as I want to be Axl Rose or I want to be a particular person, but I wanted to be able to recreate these songs myself. And that's what sort of got me into music. But it's something that kind of touched on quite. I'm often asking people this question as well about when they decided that it could potentially be a profession, because I certainly grew up and the arts were never presented to me as a viable career. Particularly up in the north of England, it's like, you know, arts is something they do down in London, and it's nice. It's nice to go to the theatre, but get yourself a proper job. So it wasn't really ever presented as a career to me, and I'm late to this. I was about late 20s, maybe 30, when I sort of quit everything. So, we talked about the Crazy Frog. So at the time I was a marketing consultant, and I quit everything to do music full time. So that kind of professional thing is, I'm pretty late to the party.
Yeah. I think it's maybe a shared English and Irish thing of the arts isn't a viable career. When you're growing up, it's like, yeah, you can have these dreams of maybe being a rock star, but when you get to like 12, 13, get them out of your head and start to focus on a real career,
Yeah. And I think it's funny because I think a lot of that comes from just a lack. I don't want to say ignorance, but I don't want to make it sound bad. But even for myself, like when I quit my sort of marketing career to do music full time, a few years later, I ended up becoming musical director for a play at the National Theatre. Now, up until getting that job, I didn't even know that being a musical director was a thing. And for anyone who doesn't know, like a musical director within a theatre show is the person that ensures that the band come in and out at the right time, because obviously you've got a live soundtrack. You can't sometimes it is pre-recorded, but if you've got a live band, the musical director is responsible for that and sort of leading rehearsals and things like that. I had no idea that was a job. And so if I think back to sort of careers counsellors at school, it's like it's really industry specific, and unless you've worked within that industry, you don't understand the ins and outs. You don't understand that there's people behind the scenes producing artists, that there's mix engineers, that there's mastering engineers, that there's session guitarists, that there's a whole gamut of careers in music that you aside from the rock stars, that you kind of don't really understand until you're a part of that industry. So my poor careers counsellor, whoever it was, he probably grown up in Leeds his entire life, been a careers counsellor, I don't know, and he had no idea. So he wasn't really in a good place to sort of, help me in terms of anything artistic.
Yeah. And what was it that made you reconsider your career and make you want to make the change?
Well, I think I'm a bit of an idealist, and I've always been very creative at heart, and it was I'd started doing the singer-songwriter thing. So I think it was about 2006, I started noodling around on the guitar and singing for the first time. I'd always played guitar, but never actually sort of sung or written songs. And I'd started writing songs, and a mate lent me a 4-track recorder, which again, we're talking like this stuff doesn't exist anymore, but basically put in a cassette tape and you can record 4 different tracks on top of each other. So I recorded the guitar, then I recorded some vocals, and then I did some vocal harmonies. And I loved it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I also had a friend at the time who he's a really tough crowd, very sort of quick to take the piss, so to speak. But he was genuinely impressed, and so that sort of made me go, okay, well maybe there is something in this. So it kind of started as this sort of singer-songwritery thing. I was playing a lot, man. I was playing sort of sometimes 2-3 times a week, because I'd never done it before, and I was conscious I wasn't very good at it. And but I got the bit between my teeth, and I was like, all right, I want to get good at this. And at that time, I was quite often playing at the same venues as Ed Sheeran. This was before Ed Sheeran was known, and he was, even back then, I think this is what maybe people don't realize about, Ed Sheeran broke, but for probably 5 or 6 years before he actually broke, he was amazing at what he did. And I think he worked so hard. He was like, for every 1 gig that I did, he was probably doing 5.
Oh,
but he also had this ability to kind of just like captivate an audience in a way that, a lot of performers don't do. Anybody who's ever played in a pub knows that, most people are just going to talk over your set. But Ed Sheeran had this amazing ability to shut people up. But anyway, so I was doing the singer-songwriter thing, and I just sort of thought, man, I'd love to kind of have a crack at this professionally. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, well, let's try and make a go of this. Because the thing is as well, like working on an album, I was doing it in little pockets of like a couple of hours here in an evening, a couple of hours here on a weekend. And it was like, this is going to take me years and years to do if I can't dedicate some sort of solid time to it. So I saved up some money to keep me going for a year to pay the rent and the bills and what have you. And I just thought, okay, let's do this. Worst case scenario, in a year's time, I go back to marketing, having had an amazing year of just making music all day, every day. Best case scenario, I can try to maybe make ends meet and sort of try to forge a career. But I think I'm an idealist, Brian. I kind of think like, if I'm going to spend a third of my life working, I kind of want it to be something that I'm passionate about and that energizes me and makes me feel alive. So I think that was just sort of going, right, let's just give this a go. I'd rather try it and fail than not try it and always wonder what might have been. So threw caution to the wind and packed in my job.
Yeah. It's kind of that whole thing of make sure work doesn't actually feel like work, Yeah. You'll have a happy life. Totally. But geez, it must have been a very scary time. But did you complete the album or did you go straight into the composer side of things?
No, I did. I completed the album. But funnily enough, the album was called Hanging Up My Cape. And everybody, when I released it, they sort of said, "Oh, is this your swan song? Is this the end of Acoustic Jim?" was my performing name. And at the time, it really wasn't. But actually, it turned out it was. Because concerts that made us. One concert that kind of led to this decision, we had a gig up in Camden in London, and this gig was everything I dreamt of a gig ever being. There was 200 people there. They were all really into the music. We were getting call and response going between us and the crowd. At one point, when I sort of dropped the level down, the whole band sort of crouches down and the whole audience was crouching down with us as well. And then we launched into the sort of final chorus and everyone's back up. And it was the dream. It was like, this is what I want every gig to be like. But for some reason, after that gig, I felt really low and really flat. And basically what it was it's like we'd reached this pinnacle, but I kind of realized that was never really what I wanted to do. I never really wanted to be a performer and a singer-songwriter. The bit that I loved was being in the engine room, was being in the studio, was the writing, the recording, and the production, the kind of mechanics of it. And I think that concert was for me like a big moment when I sort of, that was as good as it gets. So why do I feel like crap afterwards? And I think it was just that realization that I spent so much time and energy getting to that point. I'd actually missed some of the kind of warning signs, which was actually this. You don't really want to do this, and this is not, you're not following your heart. So that was what created the shift. I finished the album. I even went on a little tour around the UK with it. But then I came back and I was like, no, I want to focus on the production side of things and the recording and the composing. And so, that was the shift from singer-songwriter into sort of more composition and production.
Yeah. Jeez, that actually blows my mind now. That's something you never hear. You had probably the greatest gig and it made you realize that's not what you wanted to do.
Yeah. But it's funny because one of your guests, I can't remember his surname, Alex, he sort of blew up on TikTok.
Alex Miller.
Alex Miller, that was it. Yeah. So Alex was talking about how when he gets up on stage, he just feels this energy and it's just sort of like it flows through him and he just feels like it just feels so right. I think for me, I get really nervous before I go on stage. And while some people I think harness that nervous energy and turn it into something incredible, I tried to do that, but it was always like, it always felt like the hours leading up to that gig I was so nervous and sort of withdrawn that it just never felt like a really good fit. And I did it for years. I was at it for sort of 3 or 4 years, and it took me quite a while to sort of realize that in spite of that, it wasn't quite right. But it's funny because most people sort of have that gig experience and like, right, this is it, it's happening. Yeah. But for me it was the exact opposite. But somebody once asked me a question about, because I was sort of doing a lot of songwriting at the time, and they sort of said, do you want, because there's obviously a lot of people behind the scenes who write songs for artists, and then there's a lot of people out there who are artists themselves. And one person said, okay, if there were 2 doors, one of them had artist and the other had songwriter above it, which one would you walk through? And I remember at the time thinking probably songwriter, because that means I'm behind the scenes. I don't have to be out front and on stage. And there was another kind of like things that happened throughout kind of that period where I was like, for example, finishing the album, like, most people finish an album, it's like, brilliant. Yeah. I'll listen to an interview with I can't remember his name now, James Morrison. And he said he hates the whole studio thing. He can't wait to get back out there gigging. Yeah. And I was the opposite. I was like, I just finished my album and I was like, I don't want to leave the studio. I want to go back in and do another one. So there were several warning signs that just sort of said, actually, my time is better spent in the studio.
So we've heard your best gig. Would there be a gig you'd consider your worst gig? Although I don't know if that one, it's a bit of a mix-up. Your best gig led to a bad feeling, but is there a gig that just didn't go right?
I mean, there's been so many bad gigs. It's ridiculous because the weird thing about London is that on any given night, there are literally hundreds of pubs hosting acoustic showcases or, music nights. But what that means is that it's very, very difficult for venues to actually get people in. Because there's, it's like literally the pub next door could have a night on and the pub next door could. So you have this kind of whole gigging sort of concept that if you're going to play at this night, you have to bring X number of people. So usually when you agree to do a gig in London, it's like, well, you've got to bring 10 people, you've got to bring 15. And the bigger the venue and the more sort of prominent it is, the more people you have to bring, which I kind of understand. But at the same time, that kind of leads to this kind of whole weird thing where people are coming to see their friends. They're not there for the music. So once their friend's band has played, they either leave or they just talk and they're not interested in the other music. So in terms of it gets people through the door and buying drinks for the venue and obviously selling tickets, which is what they want. But in terms of for the musician, in terms of exposing their music to people who might potentially like it, it's kind of a bit pointless. I actually found busking on the South Bank, I A, made more money and B, got more sort of fans or interest in my music from doing that for a couple of hours than probably all the gigs I played in London over like a year period. So there were loads of really bad ones, but the worst one was when I was approached by an agent who's a lovely lady called Emma from Rwanda, who just really liked my music, and she sort of said, can I be your manager? And at the time I was like, oh yeah, amazing. I'd love someone to be my manager. So she organised me to sort of take part in this music competition in Grenoble in France. And as part of that, she organised this gig at a sort of like a music venue in Grenoble as well. And that music venue, first of all, they said they'd provide accommodation. I was like, this is incredible. It's like, not only am I going out to France to play this gig, but they're providing accommodation. The accommodation was basically a camp bed on a building site. And the music venue, I turned up to the venue that night to play, and there were 2 people there.
Oh, man.
And literally, other than that's not including the barman, there was 2 people. But do you know what? Actually, the amazing thing was that the one person that was there was this girl called Emily, who knew my stuff, really liked it, and had travelled 2 hours to come and see me play live. Oh. Her and her boyfriend were the only 2 people in there. So whilst it was sort of from an ego perspective and just like, what is going on? I've come all this way and I'm playing to 2 people. But at the same time, I was so immensely grateful that she had travelled 2 hours to come and see me that I played. And I played, literally, I played an entire set for her and her boyfriend. So it was a bit of a kind of like a down moment when you sort of do that. But then, I'd done a lot of gigs in London as well, where there's probably only like 2 or 3 people in the room anyway. A lot of kind of open mics, You don't hear about this in the glory days when people are sort of filling Wembley Stadium, but Ed Sheeran will have done his fair share of gigs in sort of like a back room in London where there's been like 2 people, and one of them will have been passed out, so technically there's only one.
Yeah. You mentioned busking. I've had conversations in the past now about busking, and to me, that is my worst nightmare as a musician. Standing on the street, it's usually in your hometown where people will know you, and the fear of making eye contact with someone walking by was that. And as a guy who didn't like the performing side of music, how did you actually deal with that? Yeah,
it was difficult. But it's one of those things. If you want to be an artist, and we're talking about, and this is obviously in a time as well. Once upon a time, you could be an artist and make a load of money by selling records. You don't do that anymore. So the live element is really important. But if you're going to be an artist, you have to be able to perform. And I think that's what great performers do, is that they're not self-conscious. They're able to sort of leave any sort of element of self-consciousness at the door and literally just focus all their energy and emotion into conveying what their song's about. And that's what makes, a great performer. And so I was sort of going through the motions of saying, like, look, if I want to be an artist, I've got to be able to perform anyway. And that includes on the street. But I think weirdly, first of all, you rock up with your little suitcase, your amp, your guitar on your back, and your microphone stand, and you're sort of putting it up first of all, picking where to play. That's a bit tricky. And then you sort of get it all up and you kind of, okay, well, this is weird. But once you get going, it's almost slightly less intimidating because it's just people walking past. And the only people that will stop and listen are those that are genuinely interested. Whereas in a pub, you can start playing a set and there's just nobody cares and everyone's sort of talking and talking louder so that their friends can hear them over you playing. So yes, it is quite tricky. I mean, the one thing about you saying in your hometown, London's pretty big, so the chances of me running into anyone that I knew were pretty slim. But yeah, it is an intimidating prospect. But then at the same time, it's like, I think, yeah, if you want to perform, you've got to be able to do that. And so I pushed myself through that self-consciousness and sort of like that fear barrier. And it never really got any easier. But as I say, the busking thing, I always felt in terms of, I was you'd probably make about £25 an hour busking, selling CDs and people sort of donating stuff. I've heard people talk about, you go up to Oxford and Cambridge where there's loads of tourists, you can make 40 quid an hour, which is, that's more than you're going to make in a pub because pubs generally don't pay you. They'll give you a percentage of ticket sales after 15 people have been in, which, it works out to something which might or might not cover your tube fare home. Probably not. So yeah, from a busking point of view, I felt I got better exposure and certainly earned more money busking than I did in any pub gigs in London.
That's something I definitely understand. I've heard of a few guys up in Dublin that have actually made a career out of busking. They'll go out 7 days a week, and that's it for them. That's the top for them. They don't have any interest in progressing further. They actually make a decent living out of busking. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
But so you decided you didn't want to be performing. What were the steps you took to become a composer, be working behind the scenes, be a producer?
So I think the first thing I did was, did I have a copy of? Yeah, I had a computer, I had a Mac with Logic on it. But I didn't really, I had very rudimentary knowledge. So the first thing I did was one evening a week for 12 weeks course on Logic, just to basically kind of go, okay, take the mystery out of it, teach me the basics of what I'm doing, so that I can then hopefully take my ideas and then sort of turn them into a recording. So that was phase one. Then thereafter, very much a case of just writing as much as possible, which is weird because in the first instance I found that difficult. For many years I said I really want to be a music producer, but yet I would do anything to avoid sitting down and producing music. And you get to a point where you go, okay, well, I'm saying one thing, but my actions are telling a very different story. So it's like, if I want to be a music producer, then I need to produce music. It's like, so, to Americans talk about get on the court. It's like if you can't influence a game unless you get on the court. You can still sit in the stands shouting as much as you want. So I sort of went, okay, cool. So what's going on here? And it's, I think a lot of creatives have it. There's a great book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and he talks about it as resistance. It's like you procrastinate, you do anything to stop yourself sitting down and doing the work, whether that's writing, you could be writing poetry or writing a book or writing music, whatever it is. It's usually a creative thing, I think. You experience resistance. And I realized that mine was basically sort of fear of, I had this big idea that if I sat down to write a piece of music, I would turn something out that would be just absolute gold. It would go to number one instantly. And by doing that, I was just putting this insane amount of pressure on myself. And given that I was just starting out, there was no way of course it's going to be crap because I'm finding my feet. In the same way that, Shakespeare's probably the first plays he wrote were rubbish. We know him for sort of 12, 15, 20 of his big plays. He's written hundreds, and most of those have fallen by the wayside. And that's not even including the ones that he would have been doing on bits of scrap toilet paper when he was, So it's the idea of having to sort of push through that. So I think that was a stage for me, was to sort of get beyond that fear of failure and understanding that the reason that I wasn't doing it was because I was scared of failing. And the idea of writing for the bin, just sitting down and writing and going, hey, do you know what? I'm going to sit down for a few hours and do this. And if it's crap, I'll throw it away. And I'm okay with that. It's fine because it's all part of the process. There's those sort of baby footsteps. So yeah, I was just writing a lot, and I was very lucky to have a close friend who was a sort of very talented producer who wrote a lot of what's called production music. So a lot of the music that we hear in TV and certainly TV is what's called production music. So it's music that's pre-composed, sits on a library, and then is taken off the shelf to by editors, directors, whoever, to sort of fit their musical project. He was a really successful production music composer for EMI, and he was very generous with me that he started sending me old briefs. And by that I don't mean his old underpants. I mean literally like briefs of music that he would receive from EMI saying, this is what we want, this is the genre, here are some references of kind of stuff that we like. And they were old, so they weren't live, but he'd send me them, and then I'd sort of go, okay, cool, well, I'm going to write to this brief and see what happens. And then I'd send that music to him, and he would be really good. He'd sit with me and talk me through, this is good, this isn't great. And just, it just literally bit by bit, I've very much learned on the job. I've had since that Logic course, everything I've done has just been, we live in an age where there's a lot of great material on YouTube. So YouTube's probably helped me out a lot as well. But just by doing every day, and just sort of, talked about that, me saying like that year period. And if I didn't manage to make ends meet, I'd go back to marketing. After a year, I wasn't making ends meet. But rather than going back to marketing, I started working in a pub in the evening so that I could spend the daytime writing. And so, yeah, just writing, I was doing my own stuff, but I was also writing to brief, because it's quite different to sit down and write, for a brief, which is very descript and you've got a clear starting point, versus like, well, I'm writing for myself. In theory, I could do anything. So yeah, and it was just sort of bit by bit every day, hammering away, just keeping going, that consistency, and just, you're only as good as your last piece of music, but actually I'm more interested in you're only as good as your next piece of music. So pushing to make sure that every bit of music I make is better than the one that's come before, and that way, hopefully there's an upward trajectory.
What was the point then that felt like a turning round, like it was the hard work was starting to pay off?
Yeah, it's funny I don't think I have one per se, because even now, it's that whole concept of when did you feel like you'd made it? I still don't think I've made it. I'm a freelance composer. I never know where the next bit of work is coming from. I certainly, I think I sort of hit plateaus where I get to a point where I'm like, wow, my mixes are kind of really in a good place now. But I think the one turning point was when I was able to quit working in the pub, because when I alluded to, I got this gig working at the National Theatre as a musical director. That was what turned out to be, we did a run. It was like at least sort of 10 weeks work, and, well paid. And then the show did really well, so it got put into the big theatre for another run. So it was probably a year's worth of work all told. But that meant me that I could get out of the pub and start working like that. And then, there's another guy who used to make charity films, basically sort of promo videos for charities, and he used to come to me for bespoke music every month, and all those little things as well sort of helped. But yeah, I think if you think of like an upward trajectory, an upward, graph, then you sort of feel like you plateau for a little bit, and then all of a sudden there's a little jump, and you don't even really know what the jump is, but it's just in terms of capabilities or like a really cool job that comes through. But yeah, I still don't feel like I'm very lucky to earn a living from doing what I do, without a doubt, and I love it. But that kind of whole idea of making it, I think I'm so focused on
the next stage, next step.
Yeah. That I probably should actually spend more time celebrating the little victories when they, the victories when they do happen. I'm probably guilty of not doing that. But yeah, I don't think I'll ever make it, because I think I just have very sort of high expectations for myself and what I want to achieve. I think the difference is I've stopped beating myself up so much for not, for every second that I'm not there. It's like just understanding. It's a great quote. Tony Robbins said, you don't plant a seed and come back the following day expecting to see a tree. It takes time. You plant the seed, and there's time, water, nurturing, and eventually it grows into a big tree. And you'd never say of that tree, oh, now it's made it. It's still growing constantly.
Yeah, actually, yeah. And something that's intrigued me, I'd have to think hard now, but I don't think I've actually spoke to a composer before. But what's your process like for creating music?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because it's a bit in flux at the moment. So I've had a couple of guests on my podcast recently who've talked very much, they draw on improvisation. And as part of their creative process, the first thing they kind of sit down and do is just improvise on the piano. Without any brief, without sort of going, right, this is what I'm going to do. They just sit down and do kind of what feels right. So I think drawing on that, and what I'm trying to do with my creative process is just sit down every day and create something. And like we're talking about, right for the bin, almost be unattached to the outcome. But quite often it starts, particularly if I've got a brief and I've got references, we want music this, like this. I think quite often I'll put on a Spotify playlist of the references and kind of immerse myself in the music. Obviously, I don't want to sort of dwell too much on that, because obviously you don't want to start then trying to recreate the tracks that you're listening to. You want it to kind of be original. But I think just first of all, kind of finding a space. But again, chatting to Isabel Waller-Bridge recently, and she reads books or poetry or looks at art as a way to inspire her kind of musical creative process. So I'm kind of really interested in the idea of finding inspiration outside of actual music. But yeah, it's just sit down at generally a piano now rather than a guitar. It used to be the guitar, and just play with ideas. And I tend to work with harmony, so I kind of come up with, particularly as a singer-songwriter, I kind of come up with chords that I feel work together, and then sort of develop those out. But I think as well, there's a bit of a misnomer. It's like you sort of listen to the final products of a piece of music, and some of my pieces of music do just sort of flow. Like there's one I've got out at the moment, which is hopefully getting picked up for a Disney trailer, which literally it felt like in 3 days it just fell out of me and was incredible. And there's other pieces of music where you are literally flogging it for weeks, changing it and like, come on, and just wrestling it into some semblance of something good. So yeah, that creative process sometimes is just effortless. And, it's just like, here are my chords. Great. Let's try this sort of violin line. Yeah, that's working nicely. What about a vocal here? Oh, yeah, that's great. And it just sort of grows. And it's by the end, you're like, oh, amazing. This is exactly it. And then other times where there's also an argument like those tracks that seem to take forever. There's an argument that maybe at some point I should actually have just walked away and left it. But yeah, I think I'm increasingly feeling like the important part of creativity almost starts before you sit down to be creative. Inspiration can come from anywhere in life, in nature, going out for a walk, going to a museum. And I think trying to ensure that I have kind of a balanced and stimulated life in terms of what's going on around me, hopefully then feeds into that sort of creative process and makes it, hopefully each creative process is then that effortless one rather than me like flogging something for weeks at a time. Does that answer your question?
It does perfectly. There's absolutely nothing worse than a dragged out process, and then it really begins to feel like a chore.
Yeah. And I think in that instance, you sort of go, okay, I mean, I had a track a few weeks ago, like for it was a trailer music for a horror brief. And I think it probably took me about 7 or 8 days, maybe more. And I got to the end of it and I was like, I should have canned this after day 2 and gone, let's start a new idea. I mean, it was okay in the end, but it's like, what's the opportunity cost? Is your time better spent coming up with something new? I think it's important to remember that it's okay to let go of something and go, do you know what? Maybe I'll come back to this one day, maybe not, but maybe in this instance right now, I'm going to find inspiration in a new idea. Sit down, just try something new, and maybe that will sort of... Because I always feel as well like music is about emotion, and music is about engaging the listener emotionally. You think of any, from commercial music to even to, what I'm doing with TV and film. And I always think like the more emotion I can put into the music, the more likely that is to emotionally engage somebody else. So, getting stressed and frustrated and whipping a track to death, I'm whipping emotion out of it. There's no emotion going into that other than anger and aggression. And that's maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what was needed for the horror brief. But yeah, I think it's just being conscious of that and going like, okay, well, this isn't working. Let's take a step back and regroup.
Yeah. And working, I take it, with composing, you're not just confined to one genre. You're kind of open to any sort of genre. Today it could be rock, tomorrow it could be classical.
Yeah.
Is that something that you deal with well? Is it good to be able to be so versatile?
Yeah, I think actually sometimes for me that could be a bit of a curse. I think I am a sort of a jack of all trades, and there are composers out there, particularly within production music library, who've made a career being able to sort of cross lots of different genres, and I kind of see myself in that camp to a certain extent. At the same time, there is merit in specialization, merit in getting really good at doing. I think we composers should always play to our strengths. So I'm generally deal within the world of real instruments. I'm first and foremost, clarinet, saxophone, first instruments, guitar, piano. So I'm suited to doing things with real instruments, and there's no point in me sort of trying to get good at writing techno, because I don't listen to techno. I don't particularly like techno. So leave that to people out there who love it and sort of doing that all day, every day. And I sort of tend to sort of stick to kind of quite emotive stuff. I love funky music, and funk and soul, and anything sort of folk related. Like I did an album of music for Universal called Filmic Folk, which was emotive folk instrumentation, but with big strings and sort of real kind of filmic feel to it. So focusing on that and playing to my strengths, but at the same time, there's something quite interesting. Like at the moment, I'm doing sort of a lot of sort of orchestral trailer music, but with rappers, and doing hip hop vocals. Now I'm not. I probably could do a hip hop track, but at the same time, there's loads of kids out there doing sort of amazing hip hop, and for me, as sort of like a middle-aged white guy, to sort of try and sort of do convincing hip hop, there's no point. I might as well leave that to the guys that are doing it all day, every day. But at the same time, I'm having a lot of fun. Like the rappers that I work with, they're handling the sort of hip hop side of it, and because it's hybrid, I don't have to sort of create something which feels authentically hip hop. This is an orchestral with hip hop flavor and a rapper. So I love that challenge of being able to sort of work out, because I think I'm quite good at that, being able to sort of break a track down, listen to it constituent parts, and then rebuild it and sort of go, okay, well, this is what's happening here with this reverb, and these instruments are doing this. But I think I'm trying at the moment to sort of just narrow down my focus a bit, so that I can, start to have a speciality and also a kind of a unique creative voice. Because I think if you spread yourself across lots of genres, that can potentially dilute your creative voice a bit. And I'm very much kind of in that sort of pursuit of sort of understanding and hearing what my kind of creative voice is at the moment. So yeah, I think I play to my strengths wherever possible. And as I say, I'm starting to narrow down the focus, but not too much, because I kind of enjoy doing, lots of different things, but then maybe there's scope to, merge those genres together.
It's a great answer. The whole classical with hip hop, though, that's something I've never actually come across before. It seems like almost it shouldn't work, but it probably does.
Yeah, it's like, you sort of, I love beats, and I think this is, and let's face it, certainly old school hip hop is all sort of sampled funk tracks, and ultimately funk is, that's what I love. Some of the more modern beats is kind of very much kind of sampled sounds. When you sort of think of like modern hip hop, or even there's so many different sort of subgenres of it. But yeah, just having fun splicing those. And there's there's a great trailer for the music trailer for what's the Marvel track, Black Panther. Which is this incredible sort of, already trailer music is often hybrid, because you've got orchestral blended with sort of synths and sort of big synth sounds. So then throw in sort of like a hip hop beat, and all of a sudden we've got something really interesting. And yeah, the Black Panther trailer is definitely worth checking out, because it kind of it merges all three genres together into something really interesting. And I think, as a creative, you're constantly looking to explore, pushing boundaries, and sort of and try, create something new. And not that kind of like, orchestral hip hop is new. It's been around for a while, but certainly there's a lot of fun to be had with sort of splicing those different genres together.
So at the beginning, I mentioned you've done work for the likes of the BBC, Universal, big guys like that. How do you actually go about networking in the industry and making it to the stage where you're working with those guys?
Yes, networking. Believe it or not, is something that I'm notoriously bad at. And it's weird. It's hard to actually, when I think back and sort of try to trace how these relationships came about, it's quite hard. I mean, so certainly with the BBC, that came through that came through a producer. It's usually personal relationships. I've always been a big believer in sort of having my shop window on my website there so people can see. And I do get kind of, people contacting me out of the blue. In fact, the trailer music company I'm working with at the moment, ASX, or Audio Socket ASX in the US, came out of them contacting me and asking me to run a course for them on teaching their roster of artists how to write music for sync. So how to write music for TV and film. The Universal was very much a kind of like me being proactive. I had sort of parted companies with this. She wasn't my manager. She was a manager who was sort of sending me music briefs. I'd parted company with her and wasn't getting any music briefs anymore. So I thought, well, rather than sitting around waiting for the phone to ring, I'm going to sort of be proactive and create my own, based off of like, what floats my boat, what inspires me, what I really love to write and produce right now. And that was, I mentioned earlier, filmic folk. So I kind of wrote 7 pieces of music. I picked the best 3. I got them produced up using almost entirely real instruments, because I'm a big advocate for, as good as, this synths and VSTs get, there's never ever as good as an experienced musician playing a real instrument. So got together, cobbled together sort of cellists and violin players and drummers and sort of got these 3 tracks produced up to a really high standard. I mixed them myself, but then I also got like a mix engineer guy called Jake Jackson, who does a lot of work with Spitfire. He came in and he used to do these sessions where he'd come to your studio and just sort of listen and have a little sort of mix and go through them. So I wanted to just make sure that the mix was as good as possible. And that was a great experience. I learned a lot from Jake. And then I submitted these to Universal, to this guy that I'd met. I'd met him once through a friend. I'd run into him again at a music event, and then I ran into him at the bus stop because he happened to live near my studio. And so he was a producer at Universal. And I just sort of said, hey, Andrew, can I send you, I've got some music which I think would be really good for the catalogue. I'd also identified in the Universal catalogue they didn't have anything like this. So I was also sending them something specifically I felt there was a hole in their catalogue for. And I said, can I send you them? And he was like, yeah, sure, send me them. And they really liked them and they took them. And then they came back to me and asked me to do another 7 tracks. And then just before the pandemic, I just did another album for them as well. So it's a combination. It always, I think, boils down to personal relationships, something that I've always seen networking as something that I do when I haven't got any work on. So I'll be busy for a year, 2 years, all of a sudden it dries up, and then all of a sudden Jim popped back up at the scene. Oh, hey everyone, how's it going? Whereas actually I need to be nurturing those relationships constantly. But also, I don't like the term networking. I coined the term community building, because networking sounds really kind of corporate and sort of like almost like there's an agenda. Whereas community building is actually just building up a community of like-minded people with whom you have a good relationship. It's like not, an honest relationship, not I'm just friends with you because hopefully you can help me out. It's like, we are friends and we have similar values and beliefs and interests. So I think that community building needs to be sort of ongoing, and it's something that I think I'm getting better at now, and certainly making time for, even when I'm like mega busy. It's like make time to sort of reach out and talk to people and just keep those relationships going.
I actually really like that now, because community building versus networking. Yeah. Because for me, when I hear the word networking, it's a very harsh word, and I automatically think of cold calling or cold emailing, and the thoughts of those two things fill me with anxiety, because like with cold emailing or cold calling, you're going 80% of the time you're going to get no results.
Sure.
You know, you'll get lucky.
Yeah.
But no, community building is obviously, it sounds nicer, but the whole concept of it, you know, you're building a community of like-minded people, and in a community, when people start to succeed, they'll bring others with them.
Absolutely.
You know?
And it's as well as, like, you know, as you say, it fills you with dread, but you can't really build a relationship via email or on Instagram or on Facebook. Relationships are face to face. And, you know, like what you're doing with this podcast and what I'm doing with my podcast is you're creating a context for conversation where actually a real relationship can develop as a result of that, rather than just some sort of fleeting sort of meeting. But interesting what you're saying as well about the cold emailing. I think there's two things. There's one, you can sort of rock up to a networking event, which finally after COVID we're allowed to sort of see people again. But there's always this sort of weirdness. It's like, am I allowed to shake your hand now, or how does this work?
Yeah.
And then there's this sort of like the kind of outreach of cold emailing, which I still do to a certain extent. But what I've tried to do with the cold emailing is kind of reframe that, as in, I'm not really expecting. Because I think when you're cold emailing, you're essentially hoping that your email falls in that person's inbox at exactly the time that they need someone like you with your abilities and your skills, which, you know, is the probability of that happening is very, very slim. But I think if you reframe it and think of like, well, that's the first time that they're exposed to your name. Hopefully they read the email, but if not, they've seen the name. So, you know, maybe when you pop up on LinkedIn, they've seen it again. And it's the whole idea of like multiple times when you sort of contact or touch somebody with time, with multiple repetitions. Because I like with the example with Universal Music, I think because I'd met this producer from Universal 3 times, we'd had enough time together to sort of develop a little bit of a relationship. It wasn't me going in cold, because I've tried pitching albums to other companies where I've not known the person, and that's never worked. I've tried it with BMG, I've tried it with Extreme, I've tried it with loads of companies, and it doesn't work. It's that initial contact and just having a little bit of a personal relationship that means they open the email, that means they listen to the music. Because they, you know, people in the music industry receive so much unsolicited material, so many emails, they can't feasibly read them all, they can't feasibly listen to all the music. So you've got to give them a reason to listen to yours, and that personal relationship is the ultimate in. Even then there's no guarantees, but at least they're listening, at least they're reading, and maybe they'll give you a response, and if they're engaging with you, and even if nothing comes from that, that's fine. But just then it's okay, well, how do I stay in touch without being the annoying person that just sort of pops up every week going, have you got any work for me yet? So
yeah. I have to admit, I before the podcast, I never thought I'd be in a position to get cold emails, but obviously since the podcast has grown a bit, I do get a good few cold emails, but like you were saying, not a lot of them tend to stand out, you know, and there's nothing worse than when I find that someone emails me, they've clearly never listened to the podcast, you know, like I've had emails from authors of cookbooks wanting to come on the podcast. And I'm like, this is a music podcast. Yeah. What are you going to talk about? You know, are we going to talk about your concerts and then the last 5 minutes throw in a recipe?
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, when you're on the receiving end? So do you answer? Do you all those people that come to you cold email, do you answer them, all of them, or not?
Yes.
Okay, no,
no, honestly, okay. I don't.
No. Because, as you say, I wrote a blog post about this a couple of years ago about like a 4-point technique for approaching people. So many of those emails come in and they just go, hi. And it's like, if you do a little bit of research, you know your name is Brian. So, hi, Brian. All of a sudden, you've got an increased percentage chance of you taking an interest. I always say the subject's really important. Make the subject something relatable or something that's going to get someone's attention. That's another really important part. And then, you know, make it specific, because a lot of people do that blanket email. So this cookbook person's probably just basically got a list of podcasts and sent out one email to the whole thing. It's like, that's never going to work. You have to, A, be sort of strategic about who you're approaching, but also B, speak to the person reading it, because you can tell if it just says hi and then you've got this generic email. I'm like, delete. You haven't spent the time to sort of research whether or not I'm the right person to speak to. Why should I take the time to email you back? ultimately. So I do try to answer as many emails as possible, but if they haven't written my name, if it's not addressed to me, it's an immediate nope, sorry, gone.
Yeah, that's definitely a good rule to go by anyway.
Yeah.
You know, everything you've said there, it makes sense. If they don't put the time in, they're not worth your time.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But can you tell us a bit about the behind the scenes process of getting a song, even a song like Crazy Frog, as we mentioned, to number one?
So I think the one similarity between the Crazy Frog getting to number one and a lot of the other songs that get to number one is the huge amount of money that's thrown at it. I think people kind of maybe underestimate how much money goes into getting a track to number one. And the Crazy Frog was a bit different because obviously the Crazy Frog didn't start out as a commercial artist. The Crazy Frog started out as a viral sensation on YouTube. Jamba, who were the company that sort of bought the rights to the Crazy Frog, because the Crazy Frog initially was, I think it was a Danish guy who did the ring, ding, 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 and he recorded that and put it to the picture of a race car. And it was meant to be a sanity test. It's like, if you can look at this picture of a race car and listen to ring, ding, 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 and not laugh, then that means you're insane. Then
Right.
I think a Swedish guy then sort of created the little Crazy Frog and put that to the ring, ding, ding, ding. And then all of a sudden the Crazy Frog was bought. Jamba came in and bought the rights to that. And it was just a viral phenomenon on the internet. Jamba behind that were pumping a lot of money into TV advertising because they were selling it as a ringtone. So they were putting like literally ridiculous amounts of money into advertising the Crazy Frog. I was, in on calls whereby, normally ITV have their advertising airtime booked up like months and months and months in advance. Jamba were throwing the kind of money at them that had them sort of like bumping their clients to get the Crazy Frog, and it was ridiculous. And then obviously from that whole phenomenon, there was the producer in Berlin who did the ding, 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 which is the bit that is the Axel F is basically the theme tune from Beverly Hills Cop. Jan Hammer, I think, did it originally. Did that, and with that momentum, there's this whole kind of thing with PR. You're hot when you're hot. So when you've got that momentum of the viral sensation on YouTube, you literally couldn't put the TV on for more than 5 minutes without seeing the Crazy Frog ad. And sometimes,
I remember.
Yeah, it was ridiculous, wasn't it? It was just a sort of like oppressive almost. And sometimes you'd have it twice in the same ad break. So that with that momentum, and then you sort of like put that song out there as well. Obviously, everyone was sort of downloaded and got it to number one. But yeah, it was partly that sort of PR momentum, but yeah, just huge amounts of money were thrown at it. And what people probably don't realize is that after that, Jamba spent a lot of time and money trying to recreate the Crazy Frog. At one point, there was a skateboarding teddy bear singing La Bamba. And I remember sitting down I went through a list of sort of like classic songs. They were asking me to come up with, what songs can we do as a cover? So I was sort of coming up with this huge list of songs that we could potentially cover. And that's the thing about a viral video. If people knew how to do viral videos, everyone would be doing viral videos all the time. The fact of the matter is that they tap into some weird zeitgeist at one particular time in history, and you can't create that. And we couldn't recreate the Crazy Frog, though we tried. But yeah, that momentum and serious amounts of money is basically what got the Crazy Frog to number one. I really am very sorry.
Oh God! But as we mentioned, you kept Coldplay from number one.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's the good thing.
Every cloud has a silver lining, Brian. That's right.
Exactly. And how do you stand out with your brand through storytelling?
Yeah, it's funny you should ask this because I was on a call yesterday where everything I sort of believed about story and brand sort of was maybe thrown into question.
Oh.
So just to sort of elaborate on what I just said there, I was talking to people yesterday, and these guys are all writers and sort of, they know story because they write books, and they were saying about the reason people like stories is, specifically invest in a story is because of how it relates to them. ultimately we're all self-interested. And as much as we sort of, might really love, your story, Brian, the bit that really resonates about your story is the bit that we can relate to, and the bit that sort of potentially relates to us. So I think with sort of brand and story, I also think doing your own brand and story is really, really hard to do. So like as a modern day artist, or if you've got your own business, and I tend to sort of do everything myself, it's really hard to be objective. It's like that classic thing of writing a biog. It's really hard to write your own biog because you're basically sort of like waxing lyrical about yourself, which can actually sometimes feel a bit weird, or you sort of don't want to sound arrogant. So yeah, in terms of brand and story, it's creating, I suppose, mystique. It's creating something that people believe in. There's an amazing talk by a guy called Simon Sinek, who his catchphrase, it's all about the why. And it's like, he says that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And that was how Steve Jobs managed to create Apple and have people standing in line for, a week to get the latest Apple product, is because he just believed in making beautiful, beautiful devices, machinery, technology. And the way that Martin Luther King managed to get hundreds of thousands of people to his I Have a Dream speech, it's like they were and this was in a day before the internet. This was, there was limited ways to sort of reach people. It's because what he was saying, I have a dream, I believe, is like those people believed what he believed. And as such, they felt sort of like a kinsmanship with him. And there was a relationship there. And I think that's, true of music as well. Is like, if you believe that, certain things about music, and so for example, something that I bang on about all the time is imperfections in music, and when you have a drummer playing live, there are slight imperfections in his drumming, but that's the groove, that's the bit of magic. When Adele sings a vocal, she's imbuing that with emotion. It's not perfect, and quite often actually, I can't remember, I was listening to an Adele track recently and it wasn't tuned, but we live in an age where technology, we want everything to be perfect, and actually I think we, the listener, we actually like those imperfections. I mean, certainly within music production, I'm using plugins, so music software all the time, that are emulating gear from the 60s and 70s, and it's because when you put music through an 1176 compressor, which was developed in the 60s or 70s, you're getting harmonic distortion and sort of overtones, and it's doing something to the signal. And it's those little imperfections that we, the listener, love. We don't know it necessarily on a conscious level, but we do. So that's kind of something that I talk about because I believe in it very strongly. And I think other people who share that belief that maybe sometimes music has a tendency to be over polished and overly perfect, maybe that's when my brand starts to resonate with them, that actually, if it's about emotion, making it too squeaky clean, it's very difficult to have any sort of relationship with a robot. You want that sort of that relationship and that humanity in it, and that's what I kind of always trying to do with my music. So yeah, in terms of brand, I think it's like what's the story? What's the part of your story? What's the still part of your brand that is going to resonate with other people, like-minded people? Because that's as a musician, that's who you're trying to communicate with. You don't want to just sort of, you don't try and convert people who listen to hip hop into listening to your sort of emotive piano singer-songwriter tracks. You want people who love piano singer-songwriter tracks, and if you sing about love, then those people are going to also be kind of like, romantics. And again, I always talk about Adele because I just, I don't really listen to her music, but I think what she does is phenomenal. And every album she brings out just goes straight to number one because it's so relatable, and the way she performs and what she sings about. And she's always whinging about having lost a boyfriend, isn't it? Well, it certainly was in the original albums. And just people kind of really relate to that, and they go, yeah, me too. And it's like, I would listen to this and sit in the window and cry. So I think that's the story and the brand thing. It's, what do I relate to in that person's story? But yeah, I'm whilst I have done marketing, and I'm probably better placed than others to understand branding and story. It's a big topic, and I think there's a lot of people out there who understand it better than I.
Yeah. You made me think of something I always say as well about concerts. Actually,
yeah,
I hate going to a concert that sounds like the record.
Yeah.
You know, I actually actively go to a concert looking for the imperfections.
Yeah.
You know,
absolutely.
It makes for a better experience.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where great producers come in as well, because, when you've got a band in the studio, well, I say that perhaps less so now, but, back in the day, you used to get a band into the studio and you were trying to recapture what they used to do, what they do on stage. You're trying to get that live environment and that live energy of how they play on stage when they're sort of buzzing and they've probably had a few beers and they've got like hundreds of people, thousands, whatever, going crazy for them. That energy is what you kind of want to capture when you record an album, and great producers know how to do that. We're talking about this on one of my podcasts recently about the Red Hot Chili Peppers album Blood Sugar Sex Magic, and Rick Rubin in the studio with those guys. He managed to capture the crazy energy of the Red Hot Chili Peppers on that album, and it's incredible. And you listen to Led Zeppelin as well, like the production on that. And so, yeah, sometimes albums tend to be a bit overproduced and overly perfect, and you tune up the vocals and you make sure the drums are really tight, and sometimes you even sort of put them to quantize into grid so they're exactly on the beat, and it sucks the life out of them. That same energy that you're talking about that you get when you go to a gig, and there's like this exchange of energy between the band and the crowd.
I feel like nowadays, like 90% of music is too over polished. It needs to be scaled back to, like you were saying, back to the 70s when they were able to, and they were actually actively emulating the live performance. Definitely. It's almost, I don't know, you can't fall in love with a song that's too clean and polished the same way you can as it's a bit more gritty and,
Absolutely. No, I completely agree, mate. I think it's possibly symptomatic of the fact that increasingly more music is made on the computer rather than sort of in a live scenario. Think about a lot of, you listen to the top 40 and the vast majority of that is kind of made by people on computers. But again, this, I think, I might be reading between the lines here, but, as soon as MP3s came about and, file sharing, Napster, and then it moved on to Spotify, the way we consume music is different because, record labels are no longer making loads of money from selling physical merchandise. They're making less money. So it's like, okay, well, how can we cut costs on the production of an album? Well, first of all, we just get some guy producer in a bedroom doing it all in the box, because then we don't have to pay for studio time, we don't have to pay for a mix engineer, we don't have to pay for musicians. We can sort of have someone do it. So then it just sort of, as a financial model, it makes more sense to have people making music in their bedrooms than it does to have renting the big studios. I mean, case in point, you go to London, I think probably 20 years ago, there's probably 150 studios in London. I don't know the figures, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but you're probably down to about 20 now, because it's just they couldn't make it work because the record labels weren't making money from music in the same way, and therefore they couldn't keep these studios going with business. So, and this is me as well. I do a lot of stuff in the box, and I can get amazing results from just using a computer. But as you say, I think those results are better when you sometimes bring it out of the box and out of the computer and go, okay, let's create something in a live environment, because with the best will in the world, you can try and program drums on a computer, but it's never going to be as good as a drummer playing in a room. It's not going to be as authentic. No.
I don't know. I'd hate to see where music is going to be in 20 or 30 years if it keeps going down this path.
Yeah, it's funny. I kind of agree, but at the same time, I sort of think back to how my dad always used to sort of talk about music I was listening to as a kid, and I was always said, like, I'm not going to be like that. I'm going to stay open-minded and really embrace modern music. But and I think there is still, I'm always going to gravitate towards, musicianship and people playing instruments rather than, program stuff, just because it speaks to me and that's what I'll always listen to. But again, as we were saying earlier, I'm having a lot of fun splicing genres of music with trailer music as well. So I think it's always that case of there's always amazing music out there. It's not necessarily the stuff that you hear on the Spotify playlists and on the radio, because that's curated based on sort of, there's certain companies have quite a bit of power and they make sure their music's at the top of the listening pile. But, even as a kid, at school, there was a lot of people who would just listen to the radio and that's the music they liked. I was always kind of like, I reckon there's got to be better stuff than this. And I would actively go out and spend go to HMV on a weekend and spend 3 hours in there on a listening post, listening to sort of latest albums and things like that. Because I was sort of interested in that process and finding stuff that spoke to me. But I think a lot of people are just sort of happy with, it's like, okay, well, I listened to that. So irrespective of where mainstream music goes, I think there'll always be people out there doing like really interesting stuff, but you probably have to look harder to find it because there's so much more music. Once upon a time you couldn't release music unless you could get into a studio, whereas now everyone's releasing music. So it's a bit harder to sort of find the stuff that really resonates with you. But fingers crossed, Brian, there'll still be some really good music in 2030.
Yeah, hopefully, although I'll be past middle age then by a good bit actually, so I'll probably be still hating the music the young kids are listening to.
It's not like it was in my day.
Yeah. But I wouldn't mind, like I love all music from the 70s and I wasn't even alive in the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, weirdly, I think amongst sort of like younger generations at the moment, there's quite a lot of people kind of really into 90s music and 80s. Like my niece who's 20 seems to be sort of very much into 80s fashion and 80s. He's listening to quite a bit of 80s and 90s music. So there's always that kind of weird romance with the sort of the decades or periods that have gone before.
It's they'll always tend to go in circles. But we'll just touch on the future.
Yes.
What are the future plans, or where would you like to see yourself and Larp music in the future?
It's a good question. It's also one I'm sort of asking myself at the moment. I'm really enjoying trailers, working on trailers, because I love kind of orchestrating big epic tracks. So I'm sort of investing more and more time in working on trailers. I think, to be honest with me, Brian, it's all about, I try not to set targets based on sort of extrinsic, I want to be earning X amount of money, I want to be doing this, that, and the other. If I'm engaged with creatively inspiring and fulfilling projects on a daily basis, and I can continue that momentum, because, sometimes, certainly in the past, I've sort of taken on projects that didn't bring me joy and that have felt like a slog. But if I can just be kind of true to myself and make sure that I'm only doing work that really kind of resonates with me, and I'm doing that on a daily basis, then I think that's what I want for the future. It's more a case of how I want to feel on a day-by-day basis. And, I think at the moment the work I'm doing is great. I love trailers. I did a great little video for Manchester City just before Christmas, working on a campaign to kind of engage young people in understanding some of the water challenges that the world faces. If those kind of interesting projects. I think a blend of trailer. I do enjoy writing music to picture as well, so mixing it up with writing music to picture. And also, I think I'm even sort of getting close to that period as well. Every sort of few years, I sort of go, right, I need to do some of my own music now for me, which has no kind of like commercial objective. It's like literally, it's what I call soul music, but it's not necessarily the genre soul music. It's music that I do literally just because I really want to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'd like to see Larp grow into. It's never going to be a massive company because I'm too much of a sort of solopreneur. I think I can't handle the responsibility of having loads of employees and building it up. So I'll only ever do as much work as I can sort of feasibly do on my own or with the sort of the guys, my collaborators that I work with on a regular basis. But as long as we're doing, creatively inspiring stuff, then I'm a happy bunny.
Yeah. I really like that answer as well. It's like when we're younger, at least I know when I was younger, and it's faded since I've grown older. I make myself sound really old on this episode.
Very young.
As I grow older, it's kind of faded. But when you're younger, you're like, oh, I want to be a millionaire. I want to be hugely successful. Yeah. But I'm even realizing as I age, I want to be, as long as I'm doing something that feeds my soul, I'm happy.
there are millionaires out there who are miserable. There are millionaires out there who are depressed. There are, people who on the face of it, top of their game, they're depressed because I think we live in a society whereby we're told if we consume more, we have more, we get the right job, we get the right wife, we have the kids, we do. It's like people, that's not it might be what makes you happy, but I think you have to be very clear on what the ultimate objective is and why you're doing it, because to expect that if you have no financial worries that all of a sudden everything in your life is going to be right is probably misguided. And having awareness of that, money does not, it's cliche, but money does not buy happiness. Certainly you need a certain amount of it so that you've got shelter and clothing and what have you, and you can live. Without a doubt, but there is a graph that charts the happiness, and after a certain amount, that graph flattens off, and money no longer buys you happiness. So then you go, okay, well, what is it? And as you say, so you in your soul, how you feel on a daily basis, that is a better way to inform, happiness and contentment than having. Because it's intrinsic. I just always think it comes from within rather than without, which might sound sort of quite woo-woo. But I think, every year I go through a process of setting goals for the year to come. And the last couple of years have been less about achieving financial milestones or getting certain jobs. It's been more about, okay, how do I want to be? How do I want to feel on a day-to-day basis? And so far, I feel that has actually served me really well.
Yeah. We'll move on to the last couple of questions. So if you could see any performer or artist from history in concert for one night only, who would it be?
I think it's a toss-up between James Brown and Michael Jackson.
Two very good ones.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Jackson. So, I mean, I have a great appreciation for Michael Jackson's music. I haven't sort of listened to it in the same way and loved it in the same way that I love James Brown's music. Yeah, I talked about it earlier, my roots in funk. I love funk. But Michael Jackson was such an incredible performer. Obviously, I'm conscious that there's a whole kind of movement now which might sort of slam me for how dare I want to see Michael Jackson, given everything that's come to light since his death, go and see him live. But for me, that doesn't detract from the musician and the performer that he was. And I think I'd love to have. He was a showman as well. He knew how to dance. He put on a show. So I'd love to have seen him. And similarly, James Brown, because I think him and his band were incredible. I'd love to have seen them live. Yeah.
I actually hear Michael Jackson a lot, even nowadays, believe it or not. And like you said, you would think people would be turning away from it. But I think when it comes to him, you need to separate the music from the man. Absolutely, yeah, I agree. And the next one, if you could spend 24 hours locked in a room with any performer or artist from history, who would it be?
That's a good question. See, my immediate thought went to Arnold Schwarzenegger, but he's not technically an artist, is he? But I just have a real sort of admiration for that man. So I'd love to sort of locked in a room with Arnold Schwarzenegger and pick his brain. I think it probably would be Hans Zimmer, I think.
Right.
He's a phenomenal composer. Like, everything he does is just incredible. He seems to constantly be pushing the boundaries, or just when you think he's sort of reached his peak, he sort of does something like the recent Dune film, and I kind of think, wow, he's done it again. So yeah, I'd love to sit in a room with Hans Zimmer and pick his brains. I'm going to try and get him on my podcast, but I'm aware that might be a very, very difficult thing to do. But I believe. But yeah, I think Hans Zimmer, to sort of just chat to him about his process, his story. But it's always dangerous, isn't it? Because when you meet your heroes, they can sometimes fall short. And so if I get into a room with Hans Zimmer and he turns out to be a bit of a dick, I'm going to have like 55 minutes locked in a room with him, like thinking, oh God, I need to get out of here. I'm sure that wouldn't be the case. But yeah, there's been times in history in the past where I've kind of met people that I've been like, oh my God, that's so-and-so, and I've met them. And I've been I've been like really disappointed. Really? But then similarly, there's other times I've met people and I've gone, oh my God, that guy's like amazing. So much more so than I've ever given him credit for.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Hans Zimmer, given your profession, is kind of predictable. And
yes.
Obviously we know what you would hope to learn from him. But what would you hope to learn from Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Well, I think, I mean, it's partly because I grew up watching 80s movies, and I'm regularly, when I'm in London, I regularly meet up with a mate, and we sort of picking our way through sort of old 80s movies. And I think just like what he's achieved, he's gone from being born in a small town in Austria. He decided he wanted to be bodybuilding champion of the world. He made it happen. He decided he wanted to be a movie star, and despite everyone saying it would never happen because he's got a weird accent, he made it happen, and probably be one of the biggest of all time. And then he decided he wanted to be governor of California, and he made it happen. He's just the guy he just dreams something and brings it to life, and I just think that's incredible. And even in the face of everybody telling him it's not possible. He's got a great 5-point plan for success, and one of them is ignore the naysayers. Work your butt off, ignore the naysayers. So yeah, I just wanted to chat to him. Again, it's be risky because he come across as a really nice guy, but again, it's risky because an hour locked in a room with if he's not as nice as he seems. But I think I'd probably be in such awe of him that he could probably beat me up, and I'd still love him afterwards. So.
Yeah, I'd be the same. Now, you've obviously read his autobiography, have you?
Do you know what? I haven't. I've got it on my shelf. Really? I've got this massive hardback of his autobiography. Total Recall, is that the one?
Yeah.
I've still not read it, so yeah, I really need to read that.
Oh, if you're a fan, you're going to love it.
Okay,
it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
And the next one, is there a song that would appear on the soundtrack to your life?
Yeah, it's so hard to kind of isolate one particular song, because the thing is as well is like when thinking about this question, I sort of think, okay, that'd be a cool song, but then I'm like, wait a minute, what does that say about me? There's a number of sort of songs which I think have just sort of inspired me. But I haven't picked these, but weirdly, they're all kind of quite mopey songs, and that's not me. I'm not really a mopey sort of person, but I think for some reason they've resonated with me. But I'm going to pick an outside curveball here, and it's probably a track that most people, including yourself, have not heard of. It's a song called Song 26 by a guy called Callum McIntyre, who is an artist which I've had the immense pleasure of working with. But that song, the first time I ever heard it was just him on a piano in his bedroom, an electric piano in his bedroom, playing it. And I don't think I have ever been struck by the lyrics of a song as much as I was with that song. It's actually a song about, it's like kind of a song about mental health, really. It's a song about self-doubt. It's a song about imposter syndrome. It's about questioning yourself. It's about, having the confidence to be yourself. And it really, really blew my mind, and it moves me in a way that I'm not sure there are many other songs, if any other songs, that have ever kind of moved me in quite the same way. So I'm going with Song 26 by Callum McIntyre. Do you need me to do like a more sort of like well-known, commercially known one as well?
No.
Okay.
It's whatever song speaks to you.
Yeah, that does on an incredible level. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'll definitely have to look that one up. So sounds like a great song.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, if people might sort of go and listen to it and I go, what's that? But it's that classic thing, isn't it? I think a song is when you listen to a song or when you first hear a song, and what's going on in your life at any particular time will sort of go some way to influencing how you receive it. I mean, there's certainly, talking to a lot of the composers on my podcast, you've kind of got this area between the ages of maybe 10 and 20, 25, but all the music within that period of time that people are exposed to goes a long way to shaping who they become as creatives themselves. And I think those are really formative years, and that sort of music sort of provides that kind of soundtrack. But the day that you hear a particular piece of music, or the day that you hear a particular, like Rage Against the Machine, that first album, I can remember vividly the first time I ever saw that, and it just spoke to me in a way that no music had ever spoken to me before. And if I'd never heard it and I was to listen to it today, it might not resonate with me in quite the same way. But back then, as a sort of 18-year-old kid, it was just like, what is this? So I hope people don't go and listen to Song 26 and go, what's it on about now? Well, hey, if they do, they do. I think that's the thing. It's a very, very personal thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I always find it interesting though how music is linked so strongly to memories. Like, and it's funny that you said like from 10 to 20 or 12 to 20 or 25. I feel like any memory from my teenage years is linked to a song. Like it's almost like my teenage years have a soundtrack.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. And you hear that song and it immediately transports you back to a specific time. I mean, obviously, you've probably heard it lots of times during your teens, but there'll be one particular occasion where it just transports you back and you go, oh yeah, I remember hearing that for the first time. And there's just something, that weird magic serendipitous moment where the sort of planets align and it's sort of like, wow. What would be the soundtrack? What would be the track that would feature on the soundtrack to your life?
Oh man, seriously.
Yeah, no, the tables have turned.
Oh God. I can't think of the name of it now, but it would, Simon and Garfunkel.
Yes.
Paul Simon. He has a song that he wrote for his daughter, and it'd have to be that one.
Okay.
It's just, when my daughter was born, I kind of stumbled upon this track, and it's like it put everything I was feeling into words.
Yes.
So it'd obviously have to go on the soundtrack to my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting that it's when you heard that song, it's almost like he was singing about you.
Yeah. Exactly. And I kind of, when I heard it first few times, I was like, you know what? I wish I had actually wrote this song, and how it could be like, give it to my daughter in years to come and be like, look, I wrote this for you. Yeah. These, because it literally spoke to me so well. It was literally words that I wanted to say. Yeah. Again, the power of music. Yeah,
big time. Yeah, because if you'd have heard that song, you might have heard that song at another time in your life and it didn't resonate, or if you had, it didn't, but at that particular time, given the nature, the subject material, and what have you. I always remember with Tears in Heaven, I used to thought the acoustic version of Tears in Heaven that Eric Clapton did at Live MTV was incredible, but I didn't ever realise it was actually about the loss of his son. And when I sort of found that out, I was like, oh wow. I loved the song as it was, but when I found that out, all of a sudden it took on a whole new meaning, and then sort of totally embedded itself in my life in a different way.
Yeah. The final question, we'll flip it around. Is there something I should have asked you, but I didn't?
No. The only thing, we were talking about concerts that made us. Obviously, I mentioned a concert that broke me, or certainly broke my my performing persona. There were two other concerts that have kind of made me. The first one was the first one I ever saw, which was at the Bradford Rio in Yorkshire, and it was a band of Hare Krishna monks.
Right.
Oh, I say Hare Krishna monks. They were Hare Krishna. I don't know whether they were monks. I think they were, but they were like hardcore. They were kind of around the time that Offspring and bands like that were kind of like popular. This was a band they were called Shelter, a band of Hare Krishnas, and they knew how to rock. And I went and saw these guys live, and it was the first time I did any stage diving, and it was amazing. It was just like one of those sort of incredible moments that I'll remember forever. The idea of throwing yourself off a stage onto a load of people who caught you. I must have been maybe 15, 16 at the time. That was a big concert. And the other one was seeing the Philharmonic Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. They do this thing called the Space Spectacular, where they basically rinse all the music from Star Wars. There is loads of other stuff as well. And like the first time, I've seen it twice now, but the first time I ever saw that was the first time I'd ever properly seen an orchestra. And it's not that long ago. It's probably only 10 years ago. I was sat there as they first started off with the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Da, 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 da. Played that. And then they sort of like went straight from that into the Star Wars theme tune. And I was sat there clutching the arms of my seat, very shallow breath, just kind of tears were streaming down my cheeks. I've never experienced such a visceral musical moment in all of my life. It was incredible. And I think in some way, even if I can't identify how, that was definitely a concert that made me.
I've always kind of thought that I've never seen an orchestra live now, but I've always thought that seeing an orchestra live would be the pinnacle of live music. You know, just to feel the music.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think it is. Certainly for me, I got more from that. And it's obviously, you know, it's not a traditional gig. Everybody sat down and you are listening to the music rather than sort of like in a melee of people or in a mosh pit or whatever. But yeah, it was, for me, it was the most profound kind of musical experience I've ever had. And I highly recommend it. I think as well, you know, we're talking about the power of music to elicit memories. I think one of the reasons that when I listen to Star Wars, that takes me back to being a 6-7-year-old kid watching on repeat and almost on a daily basis, asking if I could watch Star Wars. So that there's a certain amount of nostalgia in that music as well. And I always find that with, you know, I think maybe that's my love of TV and film music as well, is I think, you know, a piece of music can be incredibly powerful, but when you associate it with a certain visual, there's a kind of power to that music that transcends if it was just on its own, like a synergy almost. And so to sit through that Space Spectacular and listen to all these songs that I've known and loved in TV and films growing up, it kind of transports me back to that nostalgic place. So I think that's, and it's incredible music. But the thing is with an orchestra, it's sort of like it goes right through you. You've got this sort of like 100 musicians, and you can just feel it. And it's just mind blowing.
Yeah, I'd say so. Well, listen, I've really enjoyed the last hour chatting with you and getting an insight into your musical history. Yeah,
absolute pleasure, Brian. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on, and it's been interesting to chat to you. Yeah, and good luck with the podcast and the concerts that made us. Can I ask you a question?
You can.
What's the concert that made you?
It would be probably AC/DC back in 2009.
Wow.
It just everything. It was the middle of summer. It was an outdoor gig. There was tens of thousands of people at it, but I think it was my first time seeing a concert on that scale. And then just like, as I was saying, I hate going to a gig and it being like you put the record on. But there was so much banter between the songs, but even the whole stage show, like they had a big train crashing through the backdrop and stuff like that. You know, it was just more so, it was so much more than just a concert. It was like a visual experience as well, you know. They really knew how to entertain and captivate the crowd.
Yeah.
So amazing. That'll be definitely the one that made me anyway.
Awesome.
Why, hello there. I'm about to make a prediction. And that prediction is, you like podcasts. If that's true, then make your way over to the Cognitive Discourse, where we have monologues, short stories, and open discussions. And every now and then I get a little ranty. If this sounds like something you're interested in, then go check us out. We're streaming on all major platforms, and hell, we're even on YouTube. New episodes out every Friday. I hope to see you there.
Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I for one surely did. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and review us on iTunes. Your 5-star review will be read out on the show. And don't forget, you can now rate us on Spotify. You can find and follow us on all social media at Concerts That Made Us Podcast. And don't forget to check out the website at www.concertsthatmadeus.com. And if you'd like to support the show, you can do so by signing up at patreon.com/Concerts That Made Us. So, until next time, keep rocking. Hey, what are you guys still doing here? The show's over. It's over. You can go home.
Go on. We'll see you next time. We'll be here. Bye.